Right, well, I think on statistics that I might have might be criticised in some way. There's two technical problems. One is Dan's enthusiasm and my lack of it. That is to keep to time. So, the economics of no, right? So what Dan's basically said is, well, who cares? Well, it depends what side of the argument you're on. So on average, according to Alex Salmond, everybody will be X amount better off. Well, averages are great if you're on the average or you're above it. If you're below it, you have serious problems, okay? So the way in which a lot of this is represented and it is debated and discussed, is, and Dan alluded to it, it's called Project Fear. Right, we'll come to that at the end. So what we're going to get through in about 7 minutes oil and gas, currency, corporate flight, corporate pollution, domestic question, debt deficits, pensions, NHS pensions, promises, timelines and costs. Okay? So, this is the economic theory which really underpins the way I view this. It's not that I come to it from, basically if you pay me enough, I'll take a particular view here. So I've decided to actually revert back to theory. So what we're looking at is, this goes back to risk and uncertainty, and they're two very different things. Most people would assume that they are similar. You would say, oh well, it's uncertain, we're going to do tomorrow, what's a risk, we wouldn't do that. We're not, right? That's the sort of classic definition from an economist out of Chicago called Frank Knight. And what we're really looking at is, risk can be quantified, right? So you can actually pay me lots of money and I will work out for you with a degree of certainty what your risk is, and I can then advise you how to manage that. Okay? Uncertainty can't be. And so what we're looking at is uncertainty is something which economics and finance doesn't deal with. We can't deal with it, it's impossible. And the two sort of key definitions or two questions are, can it be measured with a degree of precision, i.e. can we use statistics or historical trends or whatever else to come up with some notion of what might happen and some expectation of an outcome. And the other one is, would Lloyd's of London insure you? So Lloyd's of London will insure your hands, your feet, your eyes, your small left toe, your big right toe. Everything can be insured. They insure David Beckham's feet, they insure Elton John's fingers, okay? I think they would insure Scottish independence. The answer is no, because it's not risk, it's uncertainty. Okay? So oil and gas, now oil and gas is fundamental to the nationalist position. And why wouldn't it be? And most of the reports will say that the vast majority of it is owned by Scotland. And there will be taxable revenue and everything else. My question isn't really who owns it. My question is, well, how much is it worth? And when you listen to the SNP and Alex Salmond and all these people, it can be worth as much as 1.5 trillion. That's a lot of money in a population of 6 million, 6.6 million. The ONS currently values this at 120 billion.
What's ONS?
Sorry, the Office for National Statistics, ONS, okay? So, some of this comes from the Guardian, some of it comes from the FT, some of it comes from the Office for National Statistics, okay? The problem is both are probably wrong. They don't really know. Why? This is from BP's website. This is us going from the Pennsylvania boom right at the far end, okay? All the way up to now. Does that look like something that can be predicted? Okay? We really don't have any long-term value for this. And even recently, past couple of days, oil's are up to $111, $112 a barrel, and that's because of what's happening in Iraq. Right? Now, nobody predicted that. There might have been people who had a view of it within a State Department or within MOD, but nobody here in this room would have turned around, maybe the politics people, but nobody would have turned around and gone, oh, Iraq, oil price. Right? You have a rough idea, but you also can't predict how extreme or when it's going to happen. So in terms of saying it's worth up to 1.5 trillion, yeah, I'll give you that, assuming that everything's all sunshine, sweetness and light. The odds are it's not, so you need to be more conservative when you're trying to make your economic case, because it's much like when you get a mortgage. You don't say, well, if I spend all my disposable income and live off Tesco value baked beans, I can get this £500,000 house. on today's interest rate. Everybody risk manages what they do. It's the same as doing this. You need to be conservative and do some sensitivity and scenario analysis, and I don't think the Nationals do that. I think they present a very rosy economic case. Currency, sterling, euros, dollars, currency union in the UK, doesn't really matter. Because actually, nobody's really said this, all you have to do is peg your currency. And so Ireland did it, China did it, Hong Kong dollar, all these things are possible, right? An independent Scotland's problem is it doesn't have the institutions just now, because to do it you need a central bank, and more importantly you need a credible central bank. And that's not necessarily going to happen in the short term. Corporate flight. Businesses have shareholders, and shareholders like certainty. Okay? Huge companies. We are FTSE 100, 14,000 employees, Glasgow headquarters. Alliance Trust, 250 UK employees, 3.5 billion under management, Dundee headquarters. Standard Life, 5,000 employees, Edinburgh. RBS, 12,000, Edinburgh. We've also got Bar, Agreco, Menzies, Stagecoach, Devil, Woodgroup, it goes on and on and on. Right? There is huge amounts of economic activity that sits within Scotland's borders. Okay? These companies are already buying locations in England because they don't know what they're going to do. Because once you're here and you have all this international business, currency becomes hugely important. You need the stability, otherwise your business goes. And for we to maintain the stability, all we have to do is move to the other side of Berwick. We only employ 150 people in Glasgow. And they're one of the companies that have come out and said, we're not happy with this, there's too much uncertainty. Finance and financial services. Scotland has a massive financial sector, largely based in Edinburgh and Glasgow, but there are other bits and pieces around, okay? 7% of GDP, £7 billion, 40,000 people employed in banking, 20,000 people employed in insurance, assets under management, much like the way the City of London behaves, is 726 billion, right? Assets under administration, 685 billion. These are huge sums of money employing actually quite small amounts of people. But for those 60,000 people, if that moves south of the border because of certainty and that demand for that by business, that's a massive problem, it's a massive hole in the finances, such as Alex Salmon season. Corporate ownership, and this is Dan's thing about Diageo and whatever else. Well, corporate ownership does matter because that's where your tax receipts come from. And so if everything's owned within the UK, if you look at the problems we have with Google and Starbucks and Vodafone and Alliance Boots not paying their taxes, right? Getting tax is difficult. Well, it's not. It's much easier than the government pretends it is, but they just don't do anything about it. But what we're looking at is, it does matter, but actually if you look at whisky, right, 4.3 billion in sales, UK's largest food export, that's a Scottish export, right? Only 20% of the companies are owned and based in Scotland. 40% of this is owned by Diageo based in London. The corporate tax receipts for this will sit in London if there is independence. There is no getting away from that. That's a short-term problem. It's not necessarily a long-term problem, but the short-term matters, okay? Most worried, 83% of Scottish firms that employ over 250 people are foreign-owned, right? So the perception of the tax receipts, and it's not to say that these numbers are correct, but they are almost the counterpoint to what Dan said, and the truth will lie somewhere in between them. The problem is, if it's more the way I view the world and less the way Dan views it, we have serious problems, okay? Other issues, debts and deficit. UK national debt is about 1 trillion. Scotland's per capita share is 81 billion. That's a lot of money to take on in the short term. It's not to say that we won't be able to finance it and everything else, but it is not a great starting point, okay? That excludes bank bailouts. UK national debt with bailouts is 2.2 trillion. And there would have to be a per capita allocation of that to Scotland. So the number could be considerably higher and it causes more problems. This one here, this is what I do for a living, which is really sad. This is the bit that nobody's really talking about, okay? And this has actually massive impacts, not just north of the border, but south of the border. Because once you have an independent Scotland, that makes all UK pension funds who have employees either side of the border transnational, cross-border. That means the rules by which you have to fund your pension scheme fall under EU law. And so just now we can run deficits, and deficits are an issue that we can manage and whatever else. Once you fall under EU law, you've got to be fully funded. That's a lot of money, both sides of the border to fill. Okay, it's a massive problem and nobody's really dealing with it. State pensions, who's going to provide the state pensions? I've been paying the state pensions since I was about 21. The UK government owe me something, and actually I'll stay here so they'll still owe me, but if I had to go back to Scotland, right, then what happens with that? Because some of my pension has been accrued in England, some of my pension has been accrued in Scotland. How are you going to fix that? Because it's a deferred cost, it doesn't really exist. It only exists if I beat my sort of genetics and make it to 65. Right? So it's a big issue, but there's other things. Defence, if I was in naval base, no nuclear in Scotland if the SNP in, that's a problem because it wasn't really put in Glasgow because it means if there's a problem, the Scots get it. It was put there because it was the strategically best port to put it in, and it then causes problems between Falmouth and somewhere else down the south coast if it has to be moved. There's also 19,000 jobs depend on it in the sort of local area. NHS and healthcare, how's it going to be structured, how's it going to be funded? Well, if the SNP, and it will be collective, it will probably be more like the National Health Service that most people would like. That costs money. We also then have an interesting thing, which is Glasgow. Glasgow's like a cap, one of the world's best centres for penetrative trauma. Okay? That expertise sits there. The analogy used to be you go to Baltimore, Johannesburg and Glasgow if you want to become an expert on this, okay? And so what we're looking at is saying, well, there's an expertise there. LGI, Leeds in general, Manchester, London, Edinburgh, these are centres of medical excellence. They all have very, very specialist areas. And as a single country, if I have a particular problem, then within the NHS, subject to various constraints, I will be given the best treatment possible, which means I could actually be moved to a particular region of the country. Once we go cross-border, does that still happen? Doesn't seem clear. Okay? Promises, promises, I love this one. Somebody saw this line, okay? Yes campaign says quite a lot. Free childcare for working mums. That sounds good. What they've said, the lab cost, well, what they've said is that means there'll be 104,000 extra women in work, bringing in tax revenue of 700 million. That's assuming that every single non-working mother starts to work. Okay? ONS estimates there are only 83,000 non-working mums in Scotland. Even if you get that 83,000, that estimate's still 20,000 too high. And so really, a lot of the reporting of this, we can't get our head round. And so nothing I've actually said is true. It's just one particular view of the world. So as I see it, it's not risk, it's uncertainty. It cannot be predicted or managed. At the very least, there are short-run costs. In the long run, everything comes good, arguably. Okay? But the short-run costs for this will be high, and they will be high in terms of social things, like employment, unemployment, opportunity, and everything else. Because if you see the corporate flight, there's going to be lots of job losses. Okay? Every time there's an economic problem, it's largely borne by the young. Old people vote, and everybody else in the middle works. And we're already starting to look at a sort of lost generation around the sort of financial crisis. Youth unemployment sticking at around about 1 million. And these people are really going to struggle over their whole life. So you could actually double that impact by having another lost generation in Scotland. It's not to say it would happen, but it could. Arguments are poor on both sides, there's no real debate. And then you look at what they say. New tax system for Scotland, ICAS, Institute of Accountants in Scotland, came out with this. Depending on how you do the sum, it's worth between, it will cost, 650 million, or 3.25 billion. The one thing about governments, we know, is consultants make a lot of money out of them. I would be aiming more towards that side because they don't really know what they're buying, okay, so it causes problems. Big questions are not well addressed. Could Westminster do better for Scotland? The answer is yes, but it could also do an awful lot better for Manchester, Leeds, Yorkshire, Lancaster, Lancashire, right, anywhere, right, Newcastle. Westminster as a sort of pot is largely disliked in general across the country. There seems to be a great push against it, a lot about the disparity in economic treatment. So it could do better for Scotland, but it could do better for everybody else. And then, this is one of the things that keeps happening, project fear. Okay? The nationalists don't engage well with the economic debate, in part because you can see how difficult it is. And so every time I come up with something, and I argue with my father or my friends or whoever, you say, that's just project fear, you're just scared. There's actually quite a lot to be scared about. And there's an awful lot of security and benefit to remaining sort of as one nation. And I think that's me.